Hi, my name is Natalie Tavares, and my presentation is on a book, or actually some books, by an author named Lucretius, and that is called On the Nature of Things. Before we dive in, I want to speak on who Lucretius was. He was a Roman poet and philosopher. He was born in 99 BC and died in 55 BC when he was 44 years old. According to a clergyman named Jerome, he committed suicide after becoming mad from a love potion, but we don't really know what happened. His poems indicate that he was an observer of plants and animals. He was a follower of Epicureanism from a Greek philosopher called Epicurus, which emphasized the goal of a happy life and a content life. He is publicly known for his poem named the Rerum Naturae, or On the Nature of Things. The motivation of the author was based on a variety of things. One being his love and admiration of nature. He loved fields, woods, and all of Mother Nature's gifts. He also would observe animals and had knowledge of things like weather and crops. He was not one for war and social problems, but rather he craved a peaceful and quiet life. He was also influenced by his admiration for another philosopher named Epicurus. He spoke very highly of the Epicurean system and of Epicureanism. Epicurus spoke of how atoms were built and how there were forces moving against them. He also spoke of how the main focus of life should be pleasure. Epicureanism is practically an ethical philosophy since it tries to respond to the big question of how should we live, we being humans. Also, it attempts of giving a guideline to achieve such happiness. Under this philosophy, Epicurus questions pleasure and encourages the avoidance of pain. In summary, Epicureanism means dedication to pleasure, high living, and comfort. He prioritized the avoidance of suffering, which meant that if one desired certain pleasures, they would experience pure bliss or ecstasy and then suffer a hard crash, like a child with candy. This would lead that person to develop anxiety without the blissfulness and then solve them into a cycle of searching it, finding it, losing it, and so on. It would repeat and repeat and repeat. With the example of a child with candy, I thought of it in this situation because when children have candy, they are very happy, very high on sugar, and then once they're done, they crash and go to sleep, which is in summary around this area. Now, to compare Epicureanism versus Stoicism. The founder of Epicureanism is Epicurus. This philosophy focused around explaining how the goal of life is pleasure, but also how not all pleasures are the same. Some pleasures are followed by pain and suffering. And it also explains how to live a good life, one should learn to mix and discover and enjoy a stable, sustainable, and mixed version of all these pleasures. Epicurus also spoke of atomism, which is the belief that nature is made up of indestructible atoms and voids. Lucretius spoke of this and agreed with this theory. On the other hand, there is Stoicism. The founder of this is called Zeno. That was his name. This philosophy focused on explaining how the goals of life are goodness, value, and virtue. It adds how value and virtue is living in life balanced with nature, and that to do so is to live justly. This philosophy speaks of something called determinism, which is the belief that everything is predetermined. Overall, both are fundamentally about pursuing a life that is well lived. Before jumping into how it influenced Lucretius, we will explain why Epicurus influenced Lucretius. Everyday life for Lucretius was not the best. Unless someone was part of Roman royalty or nobility, mortal survival was very difficult. Most people would die from a minor laceration that would lead to fatality from an infection. Death was easier to achieve than living. He lived in a study with Epicureanism and spent his days dedicated to the study. He used Epicurus's ideologies throughout life and in his famous works to discover the differences in pleasures, the importance of atonism, and the others in his preferred ideas. Life was very fragile, and Epicureanism helped find ways to explain how pleasure could be found within thyself. Lucretius's study of Epicureanism also helped him structure his poems and is one of the only ways that Epicurus's work is still available to be studied. I came across to discover that much of Epicurus's work was purposely destroyed. That indicates that Lucretius's books are not only great pieces to learn of his views, but also of Epicurus's as well. They do not have the perfect date for when it was written, but it was somewhere in between his lifetime. That's a joke. He administered his argument in the form of a poem and in the total of 6 books. Each book began with a clean and polished introduction. In books 1 and 2, he speaks of the main principles of the atomic universe, rejects the contrasting theories of the pre-Socratic philosophers like Heraclitus, Empedocles, and Anaxagoras, and also argues against the Stoics. In Book 3, he establishes his own idea of the atomic structure and the morality of the soul. He concludes with the idea that death is nothing to us, as in, maybe that there's an afterlife. Who knows? Ha ha ha. He continues on in Book 4 to explain how sense, perception, thought, and certain bodily functions work. He also adds his own critiques of sexual passion. Book 5 delivers on the creation of this world and of the heavenly forms, along with the evolution of life and of the ever-changing human society. He ends the entire poem with Book 6, where he speaks of the world and closes with the aspects of the plague of Athens. Overall, he was trying to depict the Greek work of Epicurus and transform it into a Latin philosophical piece. It was recognized as aesthetic by Christian fathers and had received negative reactions from some Catholic seats for a while. On the other hand, it was appreciated by a handful of philosophers. Later on, it was recognized by Giordano Bruno in Italy, Edmund Spencer of England, and many more. It was seen as an inspiration during the Renaissance era and was often quoted after in that time. During the period that Lucretius wrote it, philosophers had a variety of views. But from the research done for this presentation, I found that most philosophers had rather a Stoic or Epicurus point of view. They were going towards those sides of the study. These are some quotes and excerpts from the writing that I feel summarize the main idea from the work. I also feel that they show the real personality of Lucretius. I feel like it summarizes not only the idea of how he spoke of nature, but also how he brings science into his philosophy and how he really focuses on speaking of the body, of nature, of the soul. Overall, I feel like these quotes and excerpts can really bring in the idea of what he wanted to show for on the nature of things. Here is all the credit that I'm giving to the websites that I found my little bit of info from to do this presentation. And this is also another credit slide for all of the photos that I put in to this presentation. Thank you so much for watching. The last slide is the second and last credit of all the photos that are in here.